Hey everyone, and welcome to the Kodakery. I'm Megan.
And I'm Josh.
Matt Jensen, ASC, cinematographer for Wonder Woman, is our guest this week. We had a particularly fun time talking with Matt about his career and the opportunity to be a part of such an iconic movie. If you were ever wondering what it's like to shoot epic-ness on film, well then this episode is for you. Matt shared some great insight about what it took to pull off this summer blockbuster. So, let's jump into the Kodakery and talk with Matt.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Kodakery. Today in the Kodakery, we have with us Matt Jensen, the cinematographer behind easily the biggest smash hit of the summer, Wonder Woman. Megan and I both recently saw the film. I saw it yesterday, and I'm still not over the experience. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, first, before we get into the interview, congratulations on Wonder Woman. I mean, that film is a phenomenon.
Yeah, thank you. It's still what are we, a month into its release, and I'm still kind of amazed at the response and the reaction and how the film seems to be hanging on at the box office.
Yeah. It's really it's a fantastic movie, and we'll talk a lot about it. But how did you become involved with Wonder Woman?
Well, sort of by accident, actually. I met Patty Jenkins for coffee. She sought me out based on another film that I had made, also shot on film, called Filth. She was making a small, dark comedy at the time and really liked the look of Filth and thought it would be appropriate for the movie that she was making. And we sat down and had coffee and got to know each other, and she offered me the job on that film at the end of the coffee, which was amazing and kind of unheard of. And I left it the chance, but that movie fell apart, and which happens a lot,
right,
on sort of the indie financing world. And then about 2 weeks later, she got Wonder Woman. And she called me, and luckily, I was able to do it. And I think I had enough of a resume based on some of my other work that the studio didn't really bat an eye when she wanted me for the job.
That's awesome that you were secretly being interviewed for Wonder Woman earlier at your coffee.
Right. Sure, that other movie
exactly.
fell apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. All a very elaborate conspiracy.
Yep.
Cool. What is it like to walk into a major franchise like that? What are your first thoughts?
Well, I think with anything this big, you take these things with a great deal of excitement and possibility, but there's also a real sense of dread because it is so enormous,
right,
and very hard to get your head around the action sequences and visual effects and what's possible in camera, what's possible with the help of stunts or VFX and then also you've got to remember that behind all of the logistics and the planning and the aesthetics that you're actually trying to tell a story. And so there's just an enormity of decisions that are in front of you. So it is daunting at first. And I don't think, I know I didn't ever really settle down, maybe until the last couple of weeks. Even at the premiere, I was squeezing my wife's hand so hard. She was nearly, bloodless in that limb. So, I don't think you ever relax.
Yeah, and were you, because you're stepping into the DC extended universe, the big, where a lot of other films have been in the works and around that, I mean, how much creative freedom did you have to establish your own look and feel and dig in, or was there almost like like guidance from the other filmmakers that have worked on DC films?
Well, I don't think that there was anything explicit, and there certainly wasn't a mandate that we had to do something in particular. Patty, from the very beginning, really wanted to make her own movie, and I think the studio was very supportive of that. So as far as I was concerned, the only person I really had any conversations with about the look was Patty, and the production designer and the costume designer. We all worked very closely to sort of determine what our color palette should be, and in the testing, what was working and what wasn't. So, that being said, I also felt a certain responsibility to, also keep it in the same universe. Because I'm a big fan of certainly the DC movies, particularly the Christopher Nolan's movies, and then I really like the work that Zach has done and visually with his movies. And so, and I think you can see that we borrowed some of the techniques, some of the slow motion and the action, how we shoot the action sequences are, you can look directly at Zach's work and see that there's a direct through line. So,
do you have like a bunch of the comics at home now? Did you get them all on eBay just for researching?
I wish they were worth something. I wish I had been on them from the very beginning. I do have a stack of comic books, absolutely. They served as a good reference for even if they were some of the older comics, it's interesting to see how they're inked and drawn, and then the more modern comics, the representation of the character, and then just how, just the look and how it's evolved, and it's all useful to sort of put in the blender when you're coming up with the look of a movie.
Right. Yeah, my nerdery is well established here on the Kodakery, so I'm a huge comic fan, and
oh, you are?
Oh yeah. So this was a movie I've been really, really looking forward to, and there are a couple of scenes in it that I think are honestly some of the best superhero scenes that have been put to film yet. I mean, the No Man's Land scene is so good. So anybody listening, there might be a minor spoiler, no plot details, but we're going to talk about a couple scenes. So when you're going to approach a scene like that, which I think is probably going to be one of the more iconic scenes from the movie as it ages, are you thinking about? I mean, that's the first time the world sees her in action, kind of. How do you approach something like that, where you've got it needs to be epic? I mean, is there a recipe for this that you've learned? You've done work on Game of Thrones and Chronicle and other stuff where there's some incredible scenes. How do you approach epic-ness in filmmaking?
Right. Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, I think we knew that scene had to deliver. Mm-hmm. And we knew that scene, when Wonder Woman is first revealed, we had to live up to the bar that was set, that was very high, by Richard Donner, when Superman first reveals himself. That was, a seminal film for me in my childhood. And certainly I go back to it, seeing him, rip open and see the S and hear that John Williams score, it still kind of gives me chills. And I love Christopher Nolan's Batman when Batman first says "I am Batman" by pulling Tom Wilkinson out of the limo. And I think we looked at those two movies as examples. And one of the things that they're playing with, and Patty and I talked a lot about this, is this tension that, you've gone to see a superhero movie and you're waiting for that superhero to show up. And so you can play with, by holding back, and not revealing, you can start to notch up the tension so that when the hero does appear, there's a sense of relief.
Right.
So that was first and foremost on our minds when we were constructing that sequence. So we felt a lot of pressure, and we were trying through previs and storyboards, and Patty working on the script to kind of notch up the intensity up until that moment. As they get closer and closer to the front, it gets louder, it's more chaotic. Visually, it starts to get a little more claustrophobic. And, Diana's going through this thing with everybody else of wanting to help, and they're all telling her, no, she can't help, no, she can't do this, you got to stay on mission. And you can say all this stuff, and you can think about it, and you can storyboard it, and even you can shoot it, and it's all very PC, and We shot bits and inserts from that sequence all throughout the entire schedule. So, you don't ever really have a sense of it all working until you see the edit. And, thankfully, it all kind of came together. And the first time I saw it in Patty's director's cut, I got chills. And I had a feeling. I had a feeling that if I'm having this reaction and I'm numb to the movie at this point,
right,
that the audience is going to have a similar reaction. And the response has been wild.
Yeah. It's been one of the things as a longtime comic book fan, there's a lot of times where people are like, why do you like comic books so much? And there's so many reasons that you could go into, right? But what you did there, in you and Patty, you're able to point to it and be like, that's why I like it right there. Like that moment of heroism, the best that a person can be displayed in that way is and you just nailed it. Even the color choice of how kind of gray and blue everything is, and then her costume is the only warm color on the screen. Like the whole thing, I really loved it. Obviously, I'm gushing, but I mean.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'm glad. I mean, yeah, that's what I love about comic book movies too. I mean, it's about somebody rising to the occasion, and we all want somebody to rise to the occasion to help.
Yeah.
And all those choices were very carefully sought out. The cyan of the battlefield compared to her, the red of her costume and things like that. That was very calculated.
And it's interesting. I hadn't really considered that. You're saying you have to wait until it's edited to really see if you nailed it. Like how long do you have to wait from when you've shot it to be like, okay, yeah, we did it? Like what is that length of time? Is it vary?
Yeah, I think I saw the director's cut in October or November of 2016, and I think we shot that scene. We wrapped principal in May. So, and I think we shot the majority of that sequence in February of 2016. So, yeah, it was several months.
Yeah.
But Patty's in there working and tinkering on it, so she was a little more confident than I was. So I just didn't get to see much until she was ready to present it.
Yeah, that would just scare the crap out of me. Having to wait that long,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is terrifying because you've given a year and a half of your life to something, and believe me, I've been on the other side of it where it doesn't go well, and you think, man, it's maybe time to get into the milk delivery business or something like that.
I don't think that's going to be an issue for you after this.
And also, I don't think people deliver milk anymore. Just kidding.
Yeah, see what I mean? I'm just it's wrong on so many levels.
All you can be as a cinematographer. I think we just made that clear here.
Yeah.
So does the character Wonder Woman mean something different to you now after the film is complete than it did at the beginning?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, look, I always liked the character. To me, she was always, part of the big three, and that was Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And so certainly, and I grew up watching, the Linda Carter show, and so Wonder Woman to me was always a bit of a badass, So, but I think that what she seems to mean to so many other people and women in particular, and the response that the movie has been provoking, I now see her as just so much bigger than I even thought. And it's not that she's just a pop culture icon. It's that she stands for hope and optimism, and which I didn't have a sense of entirely when we were making the movie. I knew that we were trying to show that in her character, but I didn't realize how symbolic it was to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And somebody like me who was born in the 80s, and I didn't watch that show Wonder Woman growing up, and I'm not a huge comic book person like Josh is. This is the first time that I was really like truly exposed to her as a character, you know, and it was really exciting, and I feel like she has more than the male comic people because she has that heart. You know, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that guys don't have heart, but it's just a different angle, and yeah, it's cool. It was great to see it.
Yeah, she's a much different character than the others, and I think the line that the character walks is a much more interesting one, at least at this point, in her history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So this was shot on film. So just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that decision. Was that something Patty decided from the get-go? Were you involved in that? How did that happen?
Well, it's funny that when we were originally going to shoot that sort of surreptitious black comedy, Patty was talking about shooting on film then, and I was all for it. I'm a big proponent of film. I was trained on film. I grew up shooting film, but Patty loves film, loves the look of it, loves hearing the film run through the camera, and I think really responds to how film inherently just photographs faces. And it really wasn't an argument. I mean, Warner Brothers is committed to film for their DC movies, and so we didn't have to fight or argue or anything. And I think film lent itself to this movie because of the period, because of how we wanted both Steve and Diana to look. And we wanted it also to have a little bit of texture. And to us, it was just an easy choice.
Excellent. And how does film impact the set when you're shooting? Like, what's the difference? You've shot both, and when you're rolling film versus digital, does it impact production in any way? Does it impact the cast?
Yeah, I think it has a very definitive effect on how set is run, and in a way that I like. And others would argue, I think, the other direction. But the fact when you start to turn over and you hear that mag go, there is a sense of everybody has to be on point, and it really puts a discipline on how the day is going to move. And I think structures, you can't just roll forever. And so there's this sense of, like, we've got to get this right, which I think is great because it allows performers to perform. It allows the crew to snap to attention. And I like that. I also find that I'm more present on set on a film job. I'm not hiding in a tent or running back and forth all the time. I am lighting next to camera or looking through the eyepiece, and I'm often right by the camera when it's rolling if I'm not operating. I just feel a little more connected to the whole process. It's also interesting, and this is a small component of it, but I find that when I'm shooting digital, I don't get the rush from seeing the results that I do from film, and mainly because I've been looking at a monitor all day, and I sort of know what I have. With film, it's kind of in my head, and I've done my tests, but you still get this like thrill from seeing the dailies the next day, and there's always something that surprises me in a great way, and I always find that boosts me to go into the next day of shooting, and I think it's a small but very important kind of psychological component to the whole thing. And it's interesting, I was talking to Chris Pine about film versus digital, and he said he loves film because of the intensity and then the stop, and you take a break to change a mag. And he finds a tremendous comfort in the rhythm of that. He needs the break, and then he can sort of ramp up, give it his all, and then ramp back down. And
that's cool.
I don't know. These are some of the reasons why I like film, and it's to each his own as far as that that goes.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, we don't talk to a lot of actors on the podcast, so it's kind of cool to hear that, even if it's secondhand.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hadn't considered when you're watching the dailies, you're in like a totally different mind space than on the set in that moment watching it on a monitor, so you've kind of like wiped it clean and now you're fresh eyes on it too. So I'm sure that has an impact too on the excitement of watching it.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's really the only way that you can accurately judge what you're doing.
Right.
You're just removed from the stress of the day and the time pressure, and you get to take a step back and see what's working technically, see if it's working visually and emotionally, and all sorts of things.
Nice. So, tell us a little bit about what the collaboration with Patty Jenkins was like.
Well, Patty is a very open and willing collaborator. So she likes to give very big ideas to me and all the department heads, and then we sort of go off and research and figure out and present her with options and possibilities, and then she likes to then dig deeper, and we get into the minutia of how we're going to achieve those kinds of things. So it's a very linear process in that regard. So I found that Patty provides a lot of inspiration and then gives you the space and the trust to go out and figure out how we're going to pull it off.
And how did your work, so Meg and I in research for this, looking back through your filmography, Chronicle was looked like your first feature. And then coming forward, you've done Game of Thrones, you've done True Blood, you've done a lot of really incredible television. How does that work influence your current work?
Well, I think I've sort of been steeped in the kind of fantasy, sci-fi, superhero genre for a little bit. So I've been on a definitive track, it seems, for the last few years. And I think in all of those cases, I had to figure out inventive ways to get a different look, make the situations that the characters were in, which were fantastic, feel real, and also provide some sort of center for the characters and their story to be told. And then also, I just got very comfortable working with visual effects and stunts, and I kind of knew the questions to ask and to bring techniques that I had learned on one thing into the next. And, it all sort of snowballs, that cascading knowledge base,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What were some of the hardest scenes to shoot in Wonder Woman? I mean, we don't know exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but I'm sure there was one that was maybe particularly challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had our challenges every day because we were essentially a road movie. So we were always onto a different set or to a different location, and we were shooting in the winter, so when we were shooting our exteriors, we had very little light, and we were really racing against the clock, and then all the elements of the weather were against us for most of the movie. So there's that. And, on a long schedule like this movie, normally you'll get into a set and you'll be in that set for 2 weeks, and by the third day, you kind of know the quirks of the set, where it looks good, if that wall is easy to pull or not, so you can get a camera back there, and if I make that part of the set darker, it's going to look better. So you can get really comfortable in that regard, but we never had that comfort on Wonder Woman because I think the longest we were in any set was 4 days. Wow. So it was a constant learning process for me. Every day had its new set of challenges. But I think the thing that comes to mind, the most difficult thing to pull off, and it's one that I don't think that people would necessarily realize, is the dance sequence between Ludendorff and Diana. Because of the nature of their dance and because of how Patty wanted to shoot it, we were doing these close-ups of them dancing, and the location was really tough to light. It was an older location, historically protected, so I couldn't do a lot of rigging. I couldn't, really bring up the light level in there. So I had to shoot a little more wide open than I'm comfortable doing. And so that then becomes a trick for the focus pullers to keep everything in focus. And we were we're on like a 75 millimeter lens on a 360 degree track tracking around Danny Houston, trying to keep Gal's face in the frame, and their movements weren't exactly completely choreographed. And I didn't realize this until we started getting into it. They had a basic choreography, but
they
really
were swaying.
It was up to them. Yeah, exactly. So, and we're on a dolly track, and also the light has to move with them. So I was on the dolly with a Chinese lantern on a long boom pole, trying to keep it on the opposite side of the camera so the modeling looks good to the camera. And then my focus pullers are also trying to keep them in focus on a tight close-up with a wide open stop. And the dolly grip is trying to keep up with them and trying not to get Gal's face blocked by Danny's shoulder. And it was stressful. And it's the kind of thing that if you pull it off, nobody even thinks about. But if you don't pull it off, everybody's wondering what was with that scene. Why was it so horrible and underlit and out of focus? So,
I never would have known that was challenging. I thought that was a great scene.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
So nice work.
Thanks. There are pictures somewhere, that the publicity took of us on this big train of a dolly with like 5 crew members all sitting on it, and it looks like some, early '90s music video.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous, completely.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you'd think what you would say is, the beach scene with the horses and the extras and all that stuff, but it's something that's like Megan said. I watched that scene; it's fantastic, but you'd never know that much went into capturing that moment.
It's fun. Yeah. I loved that beach scene too. I thought the lighting and everything was really beautiful. It was really beautifully shot too.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I mean, that was kind of at the end of our schedule, and we were in Italy, and we were finally in the sun, and we were on a beach, and don't get me wrong, it was tough going,
sure.
Just the logistics of it, but we had the great support of the second unit, led by Damon Caro, who directed it, and Tim Lister, who was the second unit DP, who did just a phenomenal job. And so they would, do certain sections, and we would do certain sections, and there was a real sense of the whole production coming together to make this sequence. So I didn't have a lot of worry at that point that we were going to pull it off.
And of course, you'd already had a history of working with horses in scenes with the Game of Thrones, maybe.
Yeah. And it never gets easier. It never gets easier. I have yet to figure out a perfect way to shoot people on horses. We got a little better on Wonder Woman, but we also had some goofy, kind of misfires as well. So it's tough. Horses just don't move the way you want them to.
Right. Yeah.
So when you approach a film like this, what kind of research did you do? Did you go out, like you mentioned, Richard Donner's Superman, you mentioned Christopher Nolan's Batman. Were you watching all kinds of other superhero films, or were you watching, because this is really, you're blending genres. You've got war, you've got fantasy, superhero. How are you bringing those story threads together visually?
Well, I think, I always do a ton of research, and I look at a lot of movies and all sorts of things. And I think that what all of the research can provide is just information to sort of have in your back pocket and pull out when you need it. And even if you don't take anything directly, I certainly looked at Superman and Batman Begins to see what they did well. I looked at some World War I movies, Paths of Glory and War Horse and A Very Long Engagement, also to see, how they dealt with trenches and lighting and that sort of thing. And I don't think I took anything directly from many of those movies, but again, it's all information. Patty and I also looked at, photographs, commercials, painters. She was big on John Singer Sargent, who really provided kind of the template for the lighting for us. A lot of his portraits, around the turn of the century and into World War I and his use of color,
Right.
where he would play with kind of a very controlled palette that maybe didn't have a lot of color, but then when you'd have something in the frame that did have color, it was very vibrant. So we were playing with a lot of those ideas, and he dealt a lot with soft light, which is how I wanted to light the movie, and how he rendered faces all became a model for what we were doing. So, we were taking a look at a lot of different influences. And, the other thing is, when you're working with a director for the first time, you want to see as much as you can with that director just to see what they like and what they respond to. And even if it's unrelated, what do they like, and maybe you can learn something. I mean, it's funny, but Patty and I also talked a lot about Michael Clayton, which is a movie that we both love. And it has nothing to do with Wonder Woman. But it was interesting to hear what she had said about the movie and what she liked about the movie, and because we seem to like it for similar reasons, it can sort of get us on the same sort of aesthetic, path.
Right. Yeah, and the John Singer Sargent thing is really fascinating because I can totally picture some of his paintings where it's like a winter scene and there's either like a bright sunset or a girl in a red cloak and things like that. And that's thinking about that in comparison to the No Man's Land scene, you can see that inspiration, and that's really interesting.
Yeah, he probably had the most direct influence on the look of it.
Yep, and so what are you going to move on to next? Are you planning your next film? Are you just sitting back and enjoying the spoils of victory?
Yeah, I'm looking for my next project. I haven't settled on anything yet, and in the meantime, I'm enjoying talking to you guys and enjoying seeing Wonder Woman sort of ripple through the world. And just hopefully we'll have something as interesting and as challenging as Wonder Woman for the next go-round.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, I want to end on kind of one final question. So when you look at like the superhero genre is something that has really made a huge impact in film. I mean, Wonder Woman as a character has existed for 75 years, but the depiction of Wonder Woman on film, of Batman and Superman and Spider-Man, all of these characters, has really kind of taken pop culture by storm. What is it about these characters and these stories that you think has captured people's attention right now?
I think the superhero movies now ought to be considered a genre, much like a Western or a horror movie. I think that movies historically go through these ebbs and flows where these certain genres are popular. And I think right now, when these superhero movies work, what they are about is about recognizing your strengths and asking you to use them and step up for a good cause. And I think there is a real, tangible feeling now in the world that that's what we need.
Good point.
Yeah, and there, I think it's part of the reason why the characters have existed and lasted so long. I mean, you look at Wonder Woman, 75 years, Superman's similar, and it's the work of generations. And I think you guys just added a really important piece of work to kind of the legacy of that character that probably will redefine it for a whole other generation of people.
Thank you. I certainly hope so. It's just been great to be a part of something that has that potential.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Matt, very much for coming on the show. It's been a fantastic conversation. Everybody out there, go see Wonder Woman. If you've already seen it, go see it again.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
It is a great satisfaction to be able to speak to you through the medium of this wonderful invention.